Hello, Rochelle. Here, the purpose of this video is to continue our dive into finding equations of lines. In this case, we are going to be finding equations of lines between 2 points. So we do need to remember we have two equations. We have our slope-intercept form and we have our point-slope form. And we do need to know how to find the slope between 2 points. So if we are given 2 points, such as we are here in 2a, the first thing that we are going to do, I'll go ahead and write out a step here. The first thing we're going to do is we need to find our slope. So we're going to go ahead and write our formula down. y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1 for our slope, which we call m. And we just really need to label our points. So this might be my first point, so x1, y1, and then maybe this is my second point. You can label this one your first point and the other one your second point if you want. The key is that you just keep your points together. And what I mean by that is, so if I'm going to make this my y2, -5 is going to go first, and then my y1, or 6, is going to go second. I need to make sure that when I put my x value, my corresponding x value here, that it corresponds with that -5 that's right above it. So my -3 has to go down here. And then my 0 would go down after that because that's the corresponding y value. So if we do this, we're going to get a -11 over -3, which is just positive 11 over 3. Now in this case, the easiest way to deal with it is if we look at our slope-intercept form. If you recall, this is my slope again, and this right here, 0b, is my y-intercept. Well, in this problem, I am given the y-intercept is 0, 6. So all I have to do is plug in my slope, which is 11 over 3, and then plug in my y-intercept. So here, my second step was a little bit different than what I might say in our next example. So let's go and do one that doesn't have a y-intercept so that we can talk about how to use that form and what we would do next. So let's go ahead and try and find the slope between these 2 points. And just to show you that it doesn't matter which point I pick first, I'm going to have this be my x1, y1, and this be my x2 and y2. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those into the formula. So my y2 here is 12, and my y1 is -1. I want to make sure I include the negative and the minus symbol here. Here's my x2, which is -4. I'm color coding here, and my x1 is 22, which happens to be my favorite number. Now this ends up being 12 plus 1 because a minus and a negative and a minus is going to equal a positive. This is going to equal -26. So I'm going to have 13 over -26, which is going to reduce really nicely to -1/2. So again, the first thing that I did was I found my slope. Then the next thing I'm going to do depends on which form I want to use. If I'm using y equals mx plus b form, I'm going to write that down. And then I'm going to plug in, I'll go ahead and write down, I'm going to plug in a point and m into this equation. So I'll start and just show you that when I plug in m, I'm going to have -1/2 here. And my goal here is to figure out what b is. So I'm going to need to plug in one of my 2 points. It doesn't make any difference which point you pick. You'll come up with the same b. I'll go ahead and pick the point that I labeled number 1. So my y1 is -1 and my x1 is 2. So then I'm going to have this -1/2 plus b. And so just to point out, to find b, that's what I'm doing. And so now I'm going to have -1 equals, if I take half of 22, I'm going to get 11, and that's negative. If I add the 11 to both sides, I'm going to end up with b equal to 10. And so that's my first step. And then my last step is to plug in m and b into y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to end up with y equals, I already knew that my m was negative 1/2, and my b is 10. So please note that all of your equations of lines should end up in the form y equals a number times x plus a number. Of course, your x and y could be different letters, but you need to have numbers in place of the m and the b, but you need to also have two variables, most commonly x and y. Now, if you choose it instead to use point slope form, what we're going to do first is all we're going to do is we're going to plug in our point and the slope. So we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did here. So we'll go ahead and we'll do it the other way right here. So I'm going to have my formula. Now you'll notice I labeled x1, y1, but again, it doesn't matter which point we use. And I'm just going to use this other point just to show the fact that it doesn't matter which point we use, we'll get the same answer. So I'm going to have y minus. Now this is where my y value is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just write that this is my y value. So I'm going to put 12 here. And for the m, I'm going to be putting negative 1/2 and then x minus. And in this spot right here, I'm going to be putting in my x value. So again, we have the issue of having lots of negatives here. So I'm going to go ahead and just clear that up. Minus a negative is going to end up equaling x plus 4. Then my next step is to just solve for y. So I'm going to end up having to distribute negative 1/2 x. 1/2 times 4 is going to be 2. That's going to be a minus. I encourage you to do your fractions on your calculator. And then I'm just going to add 12 to both sides, and I'm going to end up with negative 1/2 x plus 10. So I end up with the same answer. Basically, you're able to do either method, and you get to choose which one makes the most sense. So we'll do one final, I guess, two final points here. If you look here, my first job is going to be to find the slope. Now, remember, I'm going to need to decide which one is x2 and which one is y, x1, y1. I'm going to go ahead and label them. I'm going to keep everything in the same color here so that we make sure that we're understanding without the color just what it's going to look like. My y2 here is 22. My y1 is negative 9. My x2 is 7, and so is my x1. Now, if I look at this, this is going to end up with 31 divided by 0. Now this, I cannot take $31 and divide it amongst 0 people. This is actually undefined. The slope is undefined. So we can have a slope that's 0. This has a slope of 0. But an undefined slope would look like a vertical line. And you think about it, if I'm a skier, I could have 0 slope and just not make it very far because there's no slope, there's no incline. If I'm a skier on this guy, I'm going straight down. I will soon be undefined. So this equation, if you notice, x is the same. This isn't going to be a function, but this is going to be the equation of that line. It's just going to be that x is equal to 7 all along that line. So that's a little tricky. That's kind of a special case. Now, if you're still with me, we're going to just do one more problem, and that's going to involve fractions, just so we can make sure that we can do this process with fractions. Again, I'm going to plug in x1, y1, and x2, y2. So my y2 is negative 5. I'm going to subtract my y1, which happens to be negative 10. Then I'm going to plug in my x2, which is 9/2, minus my x1, which is -3. So all sorts of symbols here. Remember, two negatives are going to equal a positive. So both of these are going to end up being added. My numerator is pretty easy to add. I highly encourage, if you have a TI 82, 83, 84, that you enter your, this is a division symbol here, that you enter this into your calculator and then you just hit math, enter, enter, and that's going to give you an answer as a fraction. Or you could have found a common denominator, but this is going to end up being 15 over 2 because this is actually 6/2. Either way, you should end up with this. And then I would suggest entering this into my calculator again. This again is my division symbol, using the parentheses that are on my calculator, and then hitting math, enter, enter again. Because otherwise, I need to recognize that this is a division, which is basically going to mean that I flip the second fraction, and I'm going to end up with 10 over 15, which is indeed 2 over 3. Now, again, you would get this slope if you enter this into your calculator and hit math, enter, enter. So again, my suggestion is to enter those into your calculator. I'm just going to use the first method, which is the y equals mx plus b method. I'm over dealing with fractions, so I would probably pick this point to plug in so that I don't have to deal very much with fractions anymore. I could plug this into my calculator, but I know that this is over 1, which is going to end up being these would cancel, or I could think of it as -6 over 3 or -2. And if I add 2 to both sides, I'm going to end up with b equals -8. Now, I went through all these examples pretty quickly, so I highly encourage you, while you're watching this and taking notes, that you pause while you are watching this. Thanks for coming along to this fun video.